This video is a basic introduction to our next section, which is referred to as biomolecules. When it comes to this section, many books refer to this slightly differently. Biomolecules are technically referred to as macromolecules. The prefix macro, meaning big, is just telling you that these are the big major molecules that make up living things. There are actually many different macromolecules, but the four that make up the different biomolecules are the ones that are represented in this chart. If we look at the left-hand column here, you'll see that there are a few different biomolecules listed. We have carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids. We'll take a second just to talk about this chart a little bit, to break it down into pieces, and to explain to you some of the basic things you need to know about the different biomolecules. For starters, though, we've already talked about nucleic acids a little bit back in the chapter on DNA and RNA, so those I'm not going to go over in quite as much detail as we're moving forward, just to give us time to focus on carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. The first thing to break down is the biomolecule itself is also referred to as a polymer, meaning that it's made up of many smaller parts. The monomer is what's listed in the next column. So for example, carbohydrates are made up of monosaccharides. They're made up of other smaller pieces. This kind of thing, it becomes important when it comes to things like digestion. For example, when you eat a slice of pizza, your body doesn't use the carbohydrates that are in the pizza directly, or uses the proteins, for that matter, that are in the pizza directly. It's going to go through and it's going to break down the pizza into smaller pieces. So it breaks the carbohydrates down into simpler monosaccharides, it breaks the proteins down into amino acids, and then it rebuilds the carbohydrates and the proteins that you need. So your body's basically constantly going through this process of deconstructing the food that you're eating and then reconstructing different components that your body requires. Now, just to go through each one of these a little bit, in proteins, like I mentioned, the polymer obviously is the protein. The monomer is the individual amino acid. You might remember this from your codon chart back when we were doing DNA and RNA and getting into things like protein synthesis, taking that information from the DNA and eventually building protein at the ribosome. Amino acids were extremely important during that process. Hopefully you remember that nucleotides are the building blocks of nucleic acids, so DNA and RNA are made up of nucleotides: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. Lipids are totally different. This is the one that we haven't really talked about at all yet, aside from maybe when we were going through cells. We talked about the phospholipid bilayer a little bit at that point. But the lipids are here. Their monomer are these guys down at the bottom. The fatty acids make up lipids. So lipids are fats, so that should be kind of an easy way to remember that. Just to go over some of the functions briefly, for carbohydrates, it says provides materials to build the cell membrane. If you remember before, carbohydrates are in the cell membrane as an identifier. That's one of the ways your immune system identifies your cells. It's also used for quick energy for cells. Your cells use glucose for energy. It's stored in the form of what's called glycogen in your cells, which is then broken down into glucose during the process of respiration. Some food sources, this should all be pretty much common sense, right? Pastas, breads, fruits, vegetables, all good places to get carbohydrates. A few of the examples mentioned glucose here. Fructose is a slightly more complicated sugar. Lactose is the sugar that's in milk. And then cellulose is one of the big carbohydrate components of what makes up the cell wall in plant cells. For proteins, a few of their functions provides structure. These are structural components not only of the cell, but also of your body. So like your muscles and things are composed of proteins. Tendons, ligaments are usually made out of proteins. It says aids in muscle movement and then provides immunity. This we won't get into in too much detail, but basically when you're getting over sickness, it's because your body's creating antibodies which help protect you from whatever it is that made you sick. If it's viral or bacterial, things are a little bit different. As far as food sources go, anything where you're getting protein. It mentions seafood here. I think it's kind of ironic this list leaves off like meat products, so like beef, chicken, things like that. Pork, milk, eggs, cheese, all good sources of proteins. Protein's important for insulin. So somebody who has diabetes actually has problems with some of the proteins their bodies are making. Hemoglobin, which is what transports oxygen around in your body. I mentioned the antibodies already, which are an important part of like getting over a virus. This is what your body creates once you get the flu vaccine. And then enzymes, which we'll spend a lot of time talking about in the protein section. One thing that kind of frustrates me about this list is when we get down to nucleic acids, it has like this X'd out section, almost as if it's saying they're not found in food sources, which I think is a little odd. Honestly, nucleic acids are found in anything that was once living, which should make up hopefully most of your food. If you think about it, if you're sitting down and you're eating a hamburger, the hamburger itself is going to have nucleic acids in it. It's going to have nucleotides because there's DNA inside of those cells. Same thing with all the plant products that are on there. So like the tomatoes or the lettuce, anything like that is going to have nucleotides in it because it's going to have DNA in there. Some of your really crazy like processed foods probably won't apply, so you're not going to get nucleotides from Oreos. But most of your food is going to have that stuff in it. The examples are simple, just your DNA and your RNA. The last one for lipids, as far as the functions go here, it's important for stored energy. I think most of us know that. That's what fat is. It's stored energy. This one you might not have thought of before, cushioning and insulating your organs. So think of like some of the animals that live in very cold regions. They form like a layer of blubber or layer of fat on the outside of their bodies in order to help them do better in the cold. As far as cushioning goes, a layer of fat usually surrounds your organs as well. So if you get whacked like in a football game or something like that, it's there to protect you. And then, of course, the material used in the cell membrane, so that phospholipid bilayer. Gives a couple of examples here. Butter is a big one, like nuts, oils, anything like that is going to be a good food source for healthy fats anyway. There's lots of food sources you could eat to get the unhealthy variety. And then the example is kind of the same idea. I like that it mentions like oils and waxes, so those are things that aren't necessarily going to be food items that would also fall under this category. One thing just to mention quickly, oftentimes when we talk about food sources, we're mentioning things that involve just one individual type of biomolecule. Oftentimes, many meals you eat will actually involve all of the different biomolecules. So if you were to say, go to Five Guys and order the best thing on the menu, which is their bacon cheeseburger, right? This is a simple way to get jacked. Eat plenty of Five Guys burgers and fries. This would, of course, have absolutely everything we were just talking about. You'd have protein in the beef. You'd also probably have you definitely have some lipids in there as well. You've got carbohydrates in the bread. You've got carbohydrates in the fries. You got some carbs in the fruit and in the vegetables. I guess tomatoes are technically a fruit. That are put on top of there. You also get your nucleic acids from those sources. So you could actually get everything from that list from this meal right here. Now, it doesn't necessarily make it healthy, but it does certainly make it a good example for us. So just have a quick summary at the end to kind of break these things down. Please don't worry if you think, like, oh my gosh, that's overwhelming. He just like sort of flew through all this information. We're going to take time as we move through this week to take one video on each of these topics. So like we'll spend a day on proteins, a day on carbohydrates. We'll kind of break things down and get the bigger picture of what's going on here. Today's just a very basic introduction in order to get things started. But we'll kind of summarize things up for you at the end just so you're sure you got the important points. Alright, so just to finish this one up, a couple of the important things to take away from today is the term polymer. So things like proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and the nucleic acids, those are all polymers. They're made up of smaller parts, which are the monomers. So that's the first thing to get down. You really have to know like the monomer for each one. So you should know just right off the top of your head that proteins are made up of amino acids. So proteins are the polymer, amino acids are the monomer. Another thing that's important to know is the function. So what do these things do inside the cell? Why is it important that you have proteins? It doesn't, not just inside the cell, but also like inside your body. So the idea of like antibodies for proteins or enzymes. What do these things do that are important for you? The next thing you absolutely have to know is the source. Well, where do you get them? What food sources do they come from? What do you have to eat in order to get these particular biomolecules? And then the final one, kind of like your book was listing, is just an example of how it's used. So, if we're sticking with proteins, it's used to make muscles, it's used to make connective tissue, it's used to make a lot of those important things in your body. So if you just have a basic idea of these concepts, these are really the things that were broken down on that list that I was using as the picture. Those are the major ideas. Those are the kinds of things that I'm going to ask you from here. Again, today was just a basic introduction to the different types of biomolecules. We'll spend some time breaking them down individually later on this week. As always, I appreciate you guys watching, and make sure you take the time to answer the questions after you're finished with this video. Thanks.